Awesome. All right. So, welcome to the Midweek Mastery Call. This week's title is Own the Room: How to Lead with Confidence Even When You're the Only Woman at the Table. These Midweek Mastery Calls are just a quick, powerful way to check in, refocus, and get back to your confident self. If we have not met before, I am Abby Cameron. I am a confidence coach for women. I basically help women master their mindsets, set healthy boundaries, and step into their most confident selves. So, here's what you can expect today. This topic is really close to my heart because I have been there questioning whether or not I belong, over preparing just to feel like I have a seat at the table, and sometimes even shrinking to make other people feel comfortable. But here's what I've learned. You don't need to be the loudest to lead powerfully. You actually just need to be grounded in who you are. So today I'm going to be sharing three powerful shifts that will help you own the room, and not from a place of ego, because we all know that doesn't work, but from a place of presence, from a place of self-trust. So let's take a minute and talk a little bit about the confidence gap in terms of leadership. So, the confidence gap is when there is a disconnect in how capable someone is, so their skill set, their knowledge, and how confident they actually feel or appear. So, that confidence gap actually has nothing to do with skill. It's all about self belief. And it often affects high achieving women who underestimate their own abilities. So, it can lead to holding back, it can lead to not speaking up, or even avoiding risks when you're fully qualified. So let me give you an example of this. Let's say there's a woman in leadership with 10 years of experience. She will more likely hesitate to apply for a leadership role or a promotion because she doesn't feel that she meets all of the qualifications, while her less experienced, less tenured male counterpart applies without hesitation. That is what the confidence gap is. The competence gap is actually about a lack of skill or knowledge, not what we're talking about today. So, let's talk a little bit about that confidence gap because it's going to be really important when you're trying to show up, when you're trying to increase your leadership presence. But before we get started, let me say this. If you've ever walked into a room and doubted whether or not you belong there, if you've ever found yourself nodding along just to keep the peace, I've done it myself, or if you've stayed quiet even when you had something valuable to say, you are not alone. These are not personal flaws. These are not improvements that you need to make. They are actually learned responses. They're what many of us have actually been conditioned to do to stay safe, to stay accepted, to make other people feel comfortable. That does not mean that we are lacking in any way. It simply means that we have been trying to navigate systems and expectations that were not actually set up for women. So the good news is these patterns are all learned, which also means then that they can all be unlearned. So that's what we're going to talk about today, those three powerful shifts. So let's jump into those. When I share these three shifts with you, they're going to come across somewhat as a mantra. I want you to write these down, save them. Anytime you find yourself in a position where you want to increase your leadership position, I want you to recite these mindset shifts over and over and over. So, shift number one to reclaiming your power is I don't need to be the loudest to be the leader. Okay, this is a really big one. I don't need to be the loudest to be the leader. The biggest mistake I see with women who are trying to establish leadership presence is how much they talk in a leadership environment. You might see this with yourself, or you might see this with colleagues, but what does this look like? What does performative confidence look like when it comes to leadership? It looks like over talking. It looks like over explaining. Sometimes it's constant nodding or constant smiling because we're really nervous. We're trying to fit in. It even looks like avoiding conflict just so that we can keep the peace and agree with everyone, even though maybe we don't. So that's called performative confidence. And it looks just like it sounds, a performance. It isn't real. And so it is fueled by fear And it is also fueled by this need for approval, this pressure to kind of prove that we have a seat at the table. The opposite of that, of performative confidence, is quiet confidence. Quiet confidence is a lot more self assured, and it does not require external validation to feel secure. So it's going to look something a little more like this: only speaking when it's meaningful, not just to be heard. So it may look like we're a lot quieter, but what we say is very impactful. It's trusting that value, our value, is not tied to the volume of our voice or even our own hustle. It's also meaning that we don't have anything to prove. If we're in the room, that is proof enough. This approach is a lot more authentic, a lot more powerful without the need to be loud. This is leadership presence. So, how do you practice this? Because we've all been there. It's really easy to go into a room, your nerves are up, you want to sound competent, you want to be trusted. So, how do you practice this? Confidence does not need to be performative. In fact, it should not be performative because it's not genuine. Some of the most impactful women I've worked with lead with quiet clarity. So here's how you practice this. First, think of it this way: you do not have to speak first. You just have to speak from alignment. So be very intentional in what you say. Don't just talk to talk. And then embrace the pauses. Silence is incredibly powerful. And I think sometimes we think we have to just always say something when there is a gap in conversation. Allow the silence to be powerful. And then use grounded body language. Making contact is incredibly important when it comes to establishing our leadership presence. So that's shift number one. I do not need to be the loudest to be the leader. Practice by not speaking first and only saying things when you have something important to say. Shift number two: my presence speaks before I do. My presence speaks before I do. So, studies show that nonverbal communication accounts for up to 55% of how others interpret our presence, especially in a leadership situation. 55% of how we're interpreted as a leader has nothing to do with the words that are coming out of our mouth. So, think about somebody that you know that's in a leadership position that you've worked with in the past or that you currently work with. And maybe somebody that you don't necessarily trust or you don't necessarily believe that they can lead. So bring that person to mind. And then I want you to think about, what do they look like when they walk into the room or when they're holding a meeting? Are their arms crossed? Do they avoid eye contact, especially when there's hard information to be delivered? Do they fidget or excessively smile or talk or just seem kind of nervous and agitated? These are all signs of unconfident body language. People subconsciously read all of these indicators as competent or not competent, either in authority or not in authority, and whether or not that person can be trusted. So, how you walk into the room, how you sit at that table, and what information you deliver is actually more important or just as important as what you say. So, how do you practice this? How do you practice presence without saying a single word? Here's what I want you to try to shift into this mindset. I want you to do a body check in. So before you walk in the office, before you walk into a room, before you sit at the table and you decide to speak, do a very quick body check in. First of all, check to see if your feet are grounded. What do I mean by that? Plant them on the floor. Make sure they're not crossed. Make sure your feet are nice and flat so that your body remains still. You don't have all this nervous energy that's kind of getting you all worked up. Are your shoulders open and relaxed? Be mindful. Relax the shoulders, make sure they're back. If we're slumped like this or our arms are crossed, it's going to completely change how we're showing up in that meeting. Is your breath low and steady? Are you breathing from your center, or are you breathing from this place of stress, which is all up here in your chest and in your shoulders? And are you making intentional eye contact? So, four things you need to remember: ground your feet, Make sure your shoulders are back, breathe from your belly, and make eye contact. So that's what a body check in is. The more you can practice that before you go into these situations, the more your body will learn to just show up that way no matter what. And this works even in virtual meetings because in virtual meetings, energy can also be felt. So we can show up the same way over a screen like we are now as we can one on one in a meeting in real time. So grounding your energy makes you feel magnetic, regardless of where the meeting is. So stand in front of a mirror, start practicing your posture, practicing your eye contact so that you can shift into this place of my presence speaks before I do. Let's jump into shift number 3. I lead from self trust, not from proving. I lead from self trust, not from proving. And this is a big one. We've been conditioned as women to have to prove ourselves every time we're in a position of power. Sometimes that leads to over explaining as well because we're out there trying to hustle for our position. But what if I told you if you stopped chasing validation and started trusting your voice, that everything would change? Self trust is the foundation of confidence, and the best leaders actually lead from this place. They are not looking for external validation to figure out whether or not they belong in the room. So, considering this is a big one, how do you practice this one? How do you go into the room and override that natural conditioning to just start proving? First tip to try is try pausing before you explain. So, going back to that, embracing the silence. If you are asked to say something, if you are asked a question and you need a response, if you need a moment to gather yourself, that is power. That shows presence, that you are thoughtful. It doesn't show a lack of knowledge. So, first, pause before you begin to explain. Practice saying less and letting your words land. So, silence is not filling the gap. Okay. Just don't worry about filling the gap. Just let it be a sign of presence. Next tip, own your own voice. I know I have done this many times in a high stakes room. I'm sure you have. But what I mean by owning your voice is replacing phrases like, I'm not sure, or this might be wrong, but, and then you go into your explanation. Okay. It sounds like you're not coming across as confident. It sounds like you're not coming across as a leader. So even small shifts in your language make a big difference in your leadership presence. Change those phrases to, here's what I think, or from my perspective, and then you go on. Okay. And another one you can try is try to go one full day without apologizing or speaking up I'm sorry, apologizing for speaking up or for saying, does that make sense after every idea that you share? Just start to notice where your impulses to prove yourself begin showing up. Do they show up in certain situations? Do they show up with certain people? Just start taking stock of where do you start saying these phrases that mean you're trying to prove yourself. So I recently attended this conference for women entrepreneurs, and I felt myself a little out of my league even though the group was filled with women who had a lot less experience than I did in terms of being a business owner, I still felt incredibly intimidating. And so we would have these roundtable discussions, and I'm sitting there and we're all sharing ideas. And I noticed this in myself. I noticed that I was saying, does that make sense? Every time I would share an idea or I would share a thought or an opinion. And when I realized, I got to lunch and I kind of had a moment with myself and I was like, what am I doing? And I had this realization that all of a sudden I was in this room fully intimidated and trying to prove myself, which is interesting because it speaks back to that confidence gap that I'm talking about. Because I am highly qualified to have a seat at that table in that room. So it had nothing to do with my competence and everything to do with my confidence. So I did this myself, went in, did a body check in, used pauses when I felt nervous to try to come back and rephrased exactly what I was sharing. So it happens to the best of us. That's why we do this work. It is meant to be practice. So confidence isn't built in theory. So yes, you're learning this information today. I am sharing it with you, but the only way to start building it is to put it into action. Also, doing some reflection can help you as well. So I want you to take time to think through some of these questions that I'm about to ask you. Either share them with somebody, leave them in the comments, send me an email, but I'm kind of curious about these and really want you to take some time to think about them before that you jump into some of this practice. What would change if you walked into your next meeting trusting that you belonged there? What would change? What would change about your body language? What would change about how you say things? What would change in terms of people's responses? I really want you to think about that. What would change if you walked into your next meeting, trusting that you actually belonged there? Then I want you to write down one leadership space where you want to own the room more confidently. This can be anywhere. We have leadership positions even within our family, even within our personal lives. So it doesn't just have to be at the office. Where do you want to own the room? Maybe it's with your kids, maybe it's with family members or friends or your volunteer group. Maybe it is in your professional setting, but where do you want to take this into practice and start feeling more confident with your leadership presence? So I want you to DM me those answers, leave them in the chat, but I'm just curious to see. And that way I can cheer you on from here. So let's kind of wrap this up a little bit. Remember that confidence isn't something that you perform. It is built through self awareness, it is built through intention, and most importantly, it is built through practice. So, my challenge for you this week is to pick one of the confidence shifts and apply them to that area that you wrote down just a moment ago. Try it this week. So let's go over those shifts one more time. Shift number one is I don't need to be the loudest to be the leader. So maybe you practice that one this week, listening more instead of talking. Shift number two, my presence speaks before I do. Maybe you're practicing nonverbal communication this week. And shift number three, I lead from self trust, not proving. So leaning on your own information, trusting that you have the knowledge and the skills to handle whatever challenge you are facing or whatever's right in front of you. Awesome. Okay, I want to take a minute and just see if there are any questions. I'm going to check the chat. So if you have a question, go ahead and type it in the chat. But I actually had somebody email me that wanted to come to this call that could not. So if anybody on the call wants to put a question in, go ahead. But I am going to go back to my notes and quickly refer to this question that I was emailed. Okay, this question was emailed to me from Dana. She said, I get nervous speaking up in meetings. How do I project my confidence when I don't feel like it on the inside? Well, first of all, let me say that you are not alone. As you just heard from my experience, I was at the conference feeling the exact same way. Those butterflies in the stomach, maybe sweating a little bit, the nervous talking, the nodding, the smiling, all of the things that I said before. But confidence isn't something you wait for. So it's not something that, unless you practice, is just going to come naturally. So, a quick tip that you can do is to actually do that body check in that I was talking about. So, forget what you are trying to say. Don't worry about what you're trying to say. Trust that what's going to come out of your mouth is actually going to be competent and what you're trying to say. I want you to focus instead on your body. Start by thinking about your feet, okay? Put your feet flat on the floor. Make sure that your body is strong, that it is grounded. I want you to think about your eye contact. I want you to think about your breathing. I want you to slow it down, even if that means you have to embrace those pauses. So, the best way to stop being so nervous in these meetings is actually pay attention more to your body than to the words coming out of your mouth. So, I want you to try that. And again, the more you practice this, remember, like our body has muscle memory. So think about it in terms of exercise. Every time we go to the gym, every day we go, we do our exercises, whatever they are, our body is getting stronger and our body is remembering what we learned from the previous days. Our mind is a muscle and does the same thing. So the more you can practice doing these body check ins, regulating your breathing, making eye contact, grounding your feet, the more it's going to happen in these high stakes situations when you do start to get nervous. So, practice makes perfect for you, Dana. Okay, I'm going to check the chats. I've got a question. Okay, question. I have a hard time leading when I was an equal before. Finding that hard or finding that fine line. Sorry, I need my glasses. Okay, I have a hard time leading when I was an equal before. So I'm guessing, Chris, that your question comes from before with your colleagues, you were in the same position. Now you've gotten a promotion and now you're in a place of leadership and you're having a hard time. Um, really great question. Obviously, this happens frequently every time people move up into a position of leadership. So, the biggest thing to remember is go back and remember your evidence. What do I mean by evidence? Evidence is you obviously got the leadership position. You moved into this role for a reason. What are those reasons? Go back and take some time to reflect on your own skill set because you can only control yourself, right? So the first thing you need to do is kind of take a minute to understand and reflect on your own experience and why it got you into that leadership role in the first place. Second, practice that leadership presence that we are talking about. So, I really want you to think about, I'm going back to my shifts in my notes. That last shift, I lead from a place of self trust, not from proving. Because I'm guessing if you're asking this question, there's probably already some story that you're starting in your head that you are trying to prove yourself to your colleagues who you were once equal with, that now you are capable of being the leader. If that's a story that's happening, then really work on that shift of I lead from a place of self trust and not from proving. So, working on your leadership presence, not over explaining things, um, and really shifting your language into uh, those terms that I was saying before. Here's what I think from my perspective, but leadership presence is going to be really huge here. Now, if it's a different shift, and this is a conversation that we can have one on one later, if you want to message me, but if it's getting your colleagues to trust you as a leader, that's kind of a different conversation. But again, I will point back to they will begin to trust your competence and begin to trust you as a leader on how you show up non-verbally. Remember that research, 55% of um, what we do, how we show up, speaks volumes into how people trust us and how they trust our competence. So try that and see if that works for you. And thank you for asking that question. All right, so we are about at time. If you want some more support building your leadership presence and confidence, then I would love to work with you. So check out, I have a variety of coaching options. You can check them all out at indigocoaching.net, or you can join me for these monthly midweek mastery calls where I usually just share some great tips and give you a chance to ask some powerful questions. So I want to thank you for showing up today. Please remember that you do deserve a seat at the table exactly as you are. All right. Take care, everybody. Bye.